Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now, I want you all to imagine you're surfing the web, reading all about the latest round of political debates, which over here in the UK is depressing, but we won't go into that. Or maybe even catching the score from last night's football game. If you're a Derby County fan like me, that's equally depressing too. Or even just going out to make a simple online purchase. All of these scenarios are pretty common mobile activities. But would you expect any of the website that you visit to inject malicious code or malware onto your device? Probably not. Well, it turns out you might want to think again, as sites that appear to be good may not be as safe as you think. In fact, nearly half of the internet's most popular websites are actually deemed risky, according to the Menlo Security's State of the Web report. And even more troubling, at least 42% of the sites have used server software known to be vulnerable to cybersecurity attacks, have distributed malware, and even launched attacks at some point in the past. Not to mention having a security breach in the last 12 months. Sleep tight, everyone. Bye-bye. Seriously, Menlo Security is a pioneer in browser isolation that aims to protect organisations from cyber attacks by eliminating the threat of malware from the web, email, and documents. But I wanted to also learn a little bit more about the threat landscape itself and the challenges facing businesses and indeed just everyday web users like you and I. So I invited Kowsik Guruswamy, CTO at Menlo Security, onto the podcast today, who, when not working there, sees himself as a bit of an entrepreneur, polyglot hacker, app tinkerer, develops dude, cloud whisperer, startup advisor, speaker, blogger and writer. But let me tell you, he had me at cloud whisperer. What a cool title that is. But enough from me. I invite you to join me on a little road trip to San Francisco, where Kowsik is waiting to speak with us. So let's get him on the show now. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Sure. Thanks, Neil, for having me on the show. My name is Kowsik. I'm Chief Technology Officer with Menlo Security.
I think most people listening to our conversation today will think that they are tech savvy enough to know what a dodgy website is and comparing a dodgy one to a safe one. But when I read the Menlo report that nearly half of the internet's most popular websites are actually deemed risky, it even made me stand up and pay attention. So can you tell me a little bit more about the findings in that report?
Yeah, I think what we wanted to do was, as you mentioned, most people have a general awareness that web is inherently a risky place. And we wanted to quantify that in some ways using some easily understandable metrics. So we took the top, 100,000 websites, and then we used a real browser, like a Chrome browser, to automatically go and visit each website. And when it visited each website, what we would also count is, like, if you go to CNN.com or BBC or whatever, your browser is not just going to that site. It's actually loading advertisements and beacons and trackers and from various other places. And so we count all of those as well. And I think on average, a given website, when you visit, your browser is actually going to 25 other what we call background sites. Okay, so there's a big sprawl that happens. And so for each one of those websites, we kind of looked at a few different factors. The first one was, is that website running an old version of a web server, like an Apache or an IIS or WordPress or Drupal or whatever the case may be, that are known to have certain vulnerabilities? And then we also looked at various threat intelligence to figure out if that particular website had suffered a security breach in the recent past. So we kind of put those things together. So if you went to a website and one of those background websites were sort of, questionable, then the site that you visited got marked as risky and was tainted. So we sort of followed that methodology to go and analyze 100,000 websites, and that's where we came up with that number.
And one of the stats that really stood out for me was I think it was 10% of good websites are actually bad. And it's the web browser or the site functionalities that are serving as one of the primary conduits for delivering malware. So just to help people visualize the scale of the problem, just how big a problem is this?
It's actually a really big problem. And I think what's happening is, I think in that particular analysis that we did, we termed it trust hacking. So if you think about how, especially in the context of enterprises, how the security devices work to identify whether something is good or bad, they use this thing called URL categorization. It's a way to say this particular website is a news site, that website is an entertainment site, and this one is a business and economy. And typically enterprises will allow access to their employees to these sites that are deemed good. Now, what's happening is the bad actors are actually registering these malicious websites and taking the time to categorize them as business and economy. So a lot of times when we look at data from our own cloud platform, we see that at the time of click, many of these websites will start out as business and economy until 24 hours later, the rest of the world sort of figures out, oh, wait, this is actually a phishing site. And so, and that's really what's happening, which is people are setting up these sites, getting it categorized and making it look good, waiting for a little while before they start serving malware or getting people to phish.
So what are the most critical issues with these popular websites, and what's the potential impact for all the users that come across these kind of do that a bit again. So what are the most critical issues with these popular websites, and what is the potential impact for users? And I suppose most importantly, how can users listening better protect themselves and their business?
Yeah, so I think we need to kind of partition the user community. It affects everybody, first of all.
Yeah.
But if you partition the user community to enterprise users and just everyday users like you and me working out of home, doing their stuff, I think slightly different answers. On the enterprise side, just because they can invest in cybersecurity technologies like isolation, which is really something that Menlo pioneered, the browser isolation concept gives you that sense of air gap, where you can go to this website and still be assured that you cannot be infected or phished. On the consumer side, I think there's some certain hygiene. I think good hygiene you can practice on the internet. One of my personal favors that I tell people with my friends, etc., is when you get an email from what looks like your bank, even if it's just a regular email, it doesn't tell you the password has been reset, etc., don't click on it. Just go to the bank site directly. And if there is a notification, you're going to see it there. So just practicing everyday hygiene to sort of just always, be aware that the things that you get in your inbox are not always from where they say they are.
And something else that really stood out for me, especially when I was researching you guys, was when I learned about the collaboration between Menlo Security and VMware, where I think you announced promises to shore up the security of VMware's vLow Cloud and SD-WAN platform. But for anyone that's not seen that announcement or read any details about that collaboration, could you expand on that a little?
Yeah. So if you look at stepping back a little bit, if you look at the broader enterprise trend, there's this thing called cloud transformation that is happening. More and more organizations are moving from sort of on-premises software to the cloud. And in some cases, against their will, they're forced to go there, especially with things like Office 365, because Microsoft basically said, we don't support Exchange after a certain number of years, right? And what's happening is they're forced to go to the cloud, and typical enterprise security stack is in the corporate. It's the conventional wisdom is your rack and stack, 20 different boxes that all have different functions, and all of your traffic going out to the internet goes to these boxes. Now, because of the move to the cloud, what's happening is the branch offices, which normally used to VPN back or MPLS back into corporate, they're having major network congestion and user experience issues. So the branch offices now have to move what's called direct internet. They have to go to the internet directly. But the moment you do that, all of those 20 boxes that you've racked and stacked in your corporate headquarters are no longer seeing what you do on the internet. And this is really the context of SD-WAN, and it solves multiple functions, which includes not having to spend so much money on expensive MPLS lines. And so really the integration is, if you're going down this path of SD-WAN and internet breakout, you need a layer between you in the branch office and the rest of the internet as you serve and do your job and access these SaaS applications, sanctioned or otherwise. And that's really where Menlo comes in. So all of your traffic going to the internet, we sit sort of between you and the rest of the internet and give you that layer of isolation and security.
I read a great quote from Gartner recently that said, digital business and edge computing have inverted access requirements with more users, devices, applications, services, and data that are located outside of an enterprise than actually inside. So upon hearing that, a new approach to enterprise security in the cloud is clearly needed. But can you tell me more about how Menlo already offers a solution that delivers on Gartner's vision of the network security in the cloud? Because that's the way it seems from the outside looking in.
Yeah, so just take me, for example, right now, while we're recording this podcast. I'm working from home, and I am not necessarily going back to my corporate headquarters, Menlo corporate headquarters, where we don't really have appliances, but that's the typical scenario. So I'm going to the internet directly. I'm on a Zoom call with you recording it, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the common trend. There's more and more people that are very mobile. They're roaming. They're working out of coffee shops and branch offices. So really this notion of security, enterprise legacy security, delivered via appliances that are in the enterprise data center is completely breaking down. It just doesn't have the same scalability, the elasticity, and sort of comprehensiveness of security that really sort of aligns with the user experience as well. And so what Menlo has done is we've basically built out this elastic global cloud, which offers both web and email security, but really built around this notion of an isolation core that offers that 100% efficacy as it relates to security. So by consolidating a lot of these security services in the cloud, we're now able to deliver on some of the things that Gartner is talking about, right? So how do you let users work out of anywhere, maintain that user experience, but continue to provide the 100% security layer? That's really what Menlo's vision has always been, and that's the vision that we're executing towards.
So I'm curious, do you have any examples or use cases of how your isolation platform can actually provide that elusive 100% safe internet and email usage to an entire organization?
Absolutely. So let me briefly talk about why we claim 100%. I think it's important for your listeners. So if you think about traditional cybersecurity, the way things have been built, they all fundamentally try to figure out whether something is good or bad, whether the attachment that you got, the PDF that you're about to download, the website that you visited, they try to figure out whether it's good or bad. And then they really only give you two levers. You can either allow access or you can block access. And for a large organization, either of those decisions is very tricky, because if you allow access, you run the risk of breach. But if you disallow access, then the users are going to complain you're not letting them do their job, right? So the enterprise IT security is kind of caught in between. So the Menlo's idea was to essentially use this isolation concept that where we assume everything is bad. It's inherently zero trust. We assume every website, every document, every attachment, every link is bad, and we're able to safely execute all of that and isolate that in the cloud. That's how we get to 100% security, not because we've somehow mastered this detection or trying to figure out good versus bad idea, but it's this inherent zero trust approach. Now, for specific examples, you can download a bunch of case studies from our website, but I'll kind of share with you, without naming customers, a few things anecdotally that we've heard about from customers. So one of our customers is a large hotel chain in the US. Pre-Menlo, 5 ransomware hits every single month. Post-Menlo, and they've been a customer with us for about 3 years now, 0 ransomware. We have a very large, one of the Fortune 50 and one of the largest credit card companies in the world. They have 100,000 people. And one of the things that they did with us is they have 30,000 people in the call center. And these people are constantly getting Word documents with macros, in the name of inquiry. Hey, my credit card is not working, et cetera. And then these call center people will click on it and get infected. Post-Menlo, 0. Another credit card company, customer of ours, they would investigate, before they deploy Menlo, because of this whole detection game doesn't really get you perfect security. They had about 2,000 web-related incidents, not necessarily breaches, that their SOC team would have to go and investigate. Post-Menlo, that's down to 0. And one last example is a defense contractor company. They replaced their Blue Code proxy about 3 years ago. They haven't seen a single web-based virus come into their network for 3 years. So these are all sort of anecdotal evidence that really showcases that this idea of isolation, network gap, depending on how you describe it, this idea of not having to detect and assuming everything is bad holds that promise of perfect security.
Wow, that's an incredible ROI right there. I'm curious though, are boardrooms completely understanding this now, and are they adopting a more of a proactive approach rather than the traditional reactive and then going out there to find a solution after it's too late?
Yeah, I think the boardroom conversations have always been interesting, right? So the board members basically say, hey, are we secure? And the only thing that the CISO and the rest of the organization could come back and tell you, hey, here's all the stuff that we've invested in. And it was really hard to go back and say, yeah, we've solved this problem, right? And I think with Menlo, there is this opportunity now to basically say, look, we can take web and email as problem children. We can just make those problems go away. So our SOC teams and the rest of the organization can really focus on what matters, focus on the things that ultimately result in a breach, whether it's insider threat or other means, but we can declare victory over web and email.
So looking into the future, I'm going to ask you to look into your crystal ball here, but how do you think the threat landscape will continue to evolve next year as we head into 2020? And what do you think is the future of the networks, of network security in the cloud, do you think?
So there's a few different tendrils of thought here. I think the first one is more and more, I just came out of a customer advisory board for Menlo where sort of there's some very, very large customers that were there and they were sharing their opinions with us and thoughts about us. And what's happening is this notion of zero trust, I think it's gaining momentum. People haven't quite figured out exactly what that is in terms of reference architecture, but zero trust is gaining momentum. And the other thing, because of the cloud transformation, people are clearly starting to see that their security stack that used to be in the form of appliances and boxes on premises, that needs to move to the cloud also. And it needs to do it in such a way that you get better control and visibility, you get better user experience, and you get better security. So there's that push to moving everything into the cloud. So the other one, in terms of just, this is something that I've been sort of watching, right? Especially with biometric scans and retinal scans with your iPhones, etc. What used to be very two different identities, like there was a corporate identity where you would log into various company websites that you had to do work on with your own identity. And then there was a personal identity, stuff you did at home. And I think that's starting to overlap now. They're starting to sort of blur into each other. So already we're seeing things where some of the corporate executives, they're getting phished for their corporate credentials on their personal email. And so we're starting to see sort of that blur. And I think this is somewhat aggravated by social media as well, because there's just all that information. And what used to be very clear dividing lines between here's what I do at work and here's what I do at home, that line is starting to blur. So that's causing whole new sort of attacks that we're starting to see, especially phishing.
Wow. Obviously, we're seeing the lines between offline and online blurring, but it's fascinating to hear that the lines between your corporate and your personal life is blurring as well and overlapping. So looking forward to next year at Menlo, is there anything else you can share with us today about what your primary focus is going to be next year?
Yeah, I think the Menlo's journey has been absolutely fascinating, right? So we started with this idea that with the move to the cloud, we can really sort of deliver elastic, scalable security services that hold the promise of perfect security. And that's kind of where we really started with isolation. And working with our customers, we ended up with two main products, one protecting you against web, the other one protecting you against email. And as of last year, since you mentioned Gartner, we made the visionary quadrant for secure web gateways or proxies. And interestingly enough, it was, if you look at the rest of the players there, one of the quotes from Gartner really stood out for me. And they said, enterprises that really care about security should look at Menlo, which is very ironic because this is the secure web gateway magic quadrant. And they're basically saying, if you care about security, you should look at Menlo, which means everybody else is just a web gateway, not a secure web gateway. And really from the overall transition, overall transformation perspective, as where we are now is we're really seeing customers move to that cloud from a cloud transformation perspective. And for us, it's really a great, fantastic opportunity, and our customers are leading us there, is to help them move to the cloud, but in a secure way. So really taking this fantastic platform that we've built and delivering on that vision of cloud transformation, but making sure that their move to the cloud, they are not compromising on security or user experience or control and visibility. That's really sort of what we're looking forward to in the next year and the subsequent years to come.
Well, thanks so much for coming on today. So many valuable insights that you've been able to share with me. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people listening that are going to be wanting to keep up to speed with the kind of attacks that we've talked about and the work that you're doing. So for those people, can you point them in the best direction of how to find you guys online? And also, of course, contact your team if they are left with any additional questions.
Yeah, our website is www.mendelssecurity.com. It's pretty easy, and there's plenty of resources there. I'm obviously drinking the Kool-Aid. I'm the Chief Technology Officer, but I think it's invaluable for people that are visiting the website to really just hear from our customers. Ultimately, that's the best proof. And if you're really curious about this isolation concept and you really want to kind of touch and see how this actually works, you can also go to try.mendelssecurity.com, and all it takes is just 10 seconds of registration, and there's nothing to install, and you can actually see how this isolation concept can deliver on that promise of perfect security. So once again, that's try.mendelssecurity.com.
In just a 30-minute conversation together, I've learned that nearly half of the internet's most popular websites can be deemed risky. And most of all, something you said a few moments ago about phishing attempts on your personal email are now becoming more and more regular. To obtain your corporate credentials is a real eye-opener too. So a huge thank you for taking the time to come on and give me a wake-up call, and I'm sure a lot of people listening too. So thanks again.
Thank you.
Today's guest prides himself on having a unique perspective on connecting unrelated dots together in completely unique ways. His passion as a lead-by-example kind of CTO that can inspire a team to do amazing things, I think that really came across in the conversation today. And I loved having him on just to discuss these known critical issues with popular websites and the potential impact for users like you and me. Not to mention for shedding light on how 10% of good websites are actually bad. How the web browser or other site functionalities serve as one of the primary conduits for delivering malware. And most importantly of all, what can be done to easily defend against these issues. But that's what your host takes away from today's conversation. But I don't have all the answers. Far from it. So over to you. Please, I want you to share your observations, thoughts, experiences and insights by simply sending me a quick email, techblogwriter@outlook.com, tweet me at Neil C. Hughes, because I want you to join in on this conversation too. But I do have a bit of bad news for you. I'm afraid we've reached the end of another episode, but I'll be back tomorrow with another great guest. So all that's left for me to say is a big, genuine warm thank you for listening. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.